next speaker is Eliza Harris, and she will be talking about some ideas and topics around public space.
Hi, my name is Eliza Harris. I'm a principal with Canaan Associates in Orlando, Florida, and I'm going to talk to you about places for people. So this is fundamentally what we at CNU are about, right? But we need to have a more specific conversation about the places that are most vital to bringing people to our urban places. And those two places are our streets and the art of civic spaces, recognizing that streets are civic spaces, but also specifically the civic spaces that constitute, I'm short, I can't see you over here, our actual parks, our plazas, those kinds of spaces. So I'm being a little bit mean to complete streets. This is not what complete streets advocates think is a complete street, but this is what some DOTs think is a complete street. Not all of them, but a few. That bike lane's really, really scary. And I can go into all the reasons why, but is complete streets enough? And even the best complete streets, when we're talking about it in its best form, is there something that we're missing? Are we really looking for balance? We talk about balanced transportation system, and in a lot of places that's the right conversation to have because the system is so imbalanced in favor of the driving part of the public. But fundamentally, is that what we're looking for? Do merchants want parking? Merchants don't even want parking. They want customers. Parking is a way to get customers in the right place. Chuck Marone did a great job of summarizing this. We need a new set of values that doesn't seek to merely accommodate bikers and pedestrians within an auto environment, but actually seeks to accommodate autos within an environment dominated by people. And he goes on to say it's people that produce money and productivity, not cars. And understanding the right, of course this is a context discussion. If you're in a rural place and you have a farm store, parking is the right way to people that place. If you're in the middle of the downtown, parking is probably not the right way to people that place. What we actually want is as many people as possible, and we will use the means that is best to get there, whether it's transit, whether it's parking. In taking this discussion forward, we talk about things like one-earths or naked streets. The streets that are complete in a different way. They're complete because everyone is mixed together, and Ben Hamilton Bailey is going to do a beautiful job, I'm sure, of addressing this tomorrow. And I'm really glad that we're having that conversation because that's the next step on complete streets. Victor Dover, in his presentation on street design recently said, Europe isn't a dirty word anymore, that might be a paraphrase, but basically when the New Urbanists started, it's not that they didn't know about these models, it's that you couldn't have that conversation in America. Well, things have changed. That time has come. We're there now. We can start having this conversation about centering on people. We can leapfrog over the conversation in certain areas about just accommodating pedestrians and cyclists and actually get to a people-centered sort of design. And I think we're ready for that. And it depends, again, on where you are in the context that you're in, whether you can get to that conversation. But the fact that it took us this long to get to that conversation in New York City, where the vast majority of people don't have or use a car, the vast majority of people who have a car don't even use it, that indicates that this is a cultural problem. It's not a transportation efficiency question. That logic has sort of gone out the door when we can't get pedestrian-focused spaces in a place like New York City, much less in our own hometowns. Of course, you can't talk about transportation. It's not just about street design. This is Celebration. It's lovely. There are parts of it that are very, very far away from the town center. And so talking about how far we have to walk to get some places, does it make sense to have walkable streets when you're too far away to actually get there? That's a 2-mile walk, so it's a 40-minute walk to get to anything. This is actually one of Russ Preston, and I believe Matt was also involved in this design, which was a counter-proposal for Governor's Island that was a totally people-centered place. And it incorporates a lot of the discussions we've been talking about. One of the big concepts behind this was freedom from the parking garage, which Edward mentioned in his earlier talk. Why are we organizing all of our block structures, all of our design around the parking garage, even in these places that should be centered on people? The next topic I want to talk to you about, restart that time, is the systematic design of civic spaces. We've spent a lot of brain damage on the systematic design of streets. And I think it's time for us to pivot a little bit. We've done a great job of having that conversation. That conversation needs to continue, and those fights need to continue. But when I'm looking around the new urbanism, and I've talked to other people about this, there doesn't seem to be a systematized conversation around the design of public spaces the way there is around street design. And I think it's time for that. We're saying in our conversations that our civic spaces, that our centers, our gathering places are the most important parts of our community in many ways. And yet we don't have that systematic lexicon around them that gets into detail on how we design them so that they work well. And work well from a grand civic space perspective, all the way down to more intimate spaces. And it's just a matter of doing what we always do as an urbanist, looking at the spaces that are working and starting to narrow those down. And there are some institutions that are focused more on this. Project for Public Spaces does a great job. They're also focused on other issues of process and programming. We're designers, we really need to systematize the design conversation around public spaces of all scales. And the group that is, I don't know if they're systematizing it, but they're kind of dominating this conversation right now is the landscape urbanists. And in fact, in a lot of instances, they're not doing a bad job. They seem to be creating places that people like to be. And so we need to recognize that. We need to dignify it. We need to figure out why that is. Is it just because they're in New York City and kind of you put anything and people will fill it because it's Manhattan? Or is it because they're doing something right? I bet it's probably a little bit of both. You know, we've had the discussion, you don't put the High Line in my town, USA. It's not going to work. It works in Manhattan. But there are other things that they're doing that may work as well in a modern aesthetic as they would work in a traditional aesthetic. But it's more important is the idea of getting the flows down and getting the places that people, movable chairs, all those sort of basic things that we talk about. We haven't really had that in a conversation in a systematic way. Of course, as I mentioned, the street discussion, the civic space discussion, we need to have them separately, but of course they are going to come back together because a lot of times our civic spaces and our streets are very much intertwined as well they should be. Again, New York City is doing a great job of turning some of the street space into civic spaces, and they're doing it in a very tactical way. And if you haven't read Mike's work on this, Mike's discussion of this, and of course all the great work that's happening there, you should definitely get apprised of that. So designing these shared spaces is, and this is a winner that Cannon Associates designed for the competition that Russell put on and Next Gen put on a few years ago, that really thought about our entire street system as civic space. And getting into, we now have the shared street or the winner as a typical street section in almost every one of our books. Has any of them gotten built yet? Not yet, but it's coming. So these are the two, in terms of this discussion around places for people, streets, civic spaces, continue the conversation. We want to continue, as Jen said, we want to continue that conversation with you, so please come talk to us.